Hello, welcome to Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today on this very special Halloween episode is the spooky Count Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
We're also joined today by DJ Daggett himself, Adam Daggett. How are you, sir?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Actually, no, I'm not. I lied. I just lied. I'm actually pretty sick. So I apologize in advance if there's any kind of like sniffling, if I sound more nasally than normal. I should be able to cut out all of the coughs and whatnot, but...
It makes us authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you sound fine.
I'm glad that you're on the show, Adam, because you're a DJ, but you also love horror movies and you love Halloween. And I remember, I think it was last year, that you did this really amazing horror mix for Halloween.
I did.
Is that still available, by the way?
It is. It's on, you can find it on my Mixcloud page. That's mixcloud.com/DJ Daggett. And
okay, I'll put a link in the show notes for that.
Thank you. I'm particularly proud of it. I was thinking of doing another mix this year, but to be honest, for one, I used up a lot of content. Like, I don't know what else to use on another mix, and I'm so happy with it. I think I'm just going to feature it again this year because it's not just a mix for just music. I mean, I put movie clips in there. It's kind of like it's like an audio show. I mean, it's good for like parties. You can even play it in like your haunted house or something like that. So
yeah,
that was the idea that I had behind it.
It is pretty long too, if I remember correctly.
It is. It's around an hour, I think.
Yeah, so
yeah.
It's a pretty long mix. So yeah, definitely check that out. It's my favorite time of year again, and this month we have a bunch of Halloween treats lined up by taking a look at 4 post-Scream teen horror films released 1997 through 1999. This is the Saved by the 90s Halloween special.
Our count eats a Reese's peanut butter cup.
I like to eat the peanut butter first.
There's no wrong way to eat a Reese's.
When Wes Craven's Scream was released in 1996, it reinvigorated the slasher film by expanding on the ideas of Craven's 1994 film, New Nightmare, bringing a fresh, meta spin on the horror movie, using genre cliches to deliver a clever and influential fright flick.
With its success came a deluge of teen horror films, many of which attempted to bank off the success of Scream by presenting derivative knockoffs, some more successful than others. The first film we'll be discussing this month is one of those knockoffs, but it's the most lucrative and best of the bunch. Of course, we're talking about I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Last summer, 4 friends made a mistake.
I think he's dead.
It was an accident.
Never speak about this again. We take this to our grave.
But now,
Somebody sent this to me. What are we gonna do?
someone won't let it die.
You know what you did last summer? Ooh.
He's just out there and he's watching us and waiting.
Last time, he made you scream. This time, you won't have the chance. I Know What You Did Last Summer.
What are you waiting for?
Opens everywhere Friday.
Directed by Jim Gillespie and released on October 17, 1997, I Know What You Did Last Summer involves 4 young friends bound by a tragic accident who are reunited when they find themselves being stalked by a hook-wielding maniac in their small seaside town. DJ Daggett, as our guest, let's start things off with you. What did you think of I Know What You Did Last Summer?
I watched it, and I watched it when it first came out back in the 90s, and I remember it. I pretty much felt the same way watching it again as I did before. And in that sense, I want to say that I didn't really enjoy it so much. I mean, I found the whole slasher aspect, the guy that was going around killing everyone with the fish hook. I don't know. I always found that kind of lame, even back then when I first saw it. It's all right.
Adam, how old were you when this movie came out? Just so we can understand like where everybody was at age-wise.
I was 13 years old. Yeah, 13.
Okay. All right. And I was, what, 15? Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
you're a little bit older than me.
Yeah, I think I was like 14 or 15. And Ken, you were negative 2.
2 years away from being born.
Negative 2 when this movie came out. So Adam, you saw this before.
Yes.
I've seen this before. Ken, is this a first-time watch for you, or is this a rewatch?
Probably the first time I've seen it all the way through. I mean, I know about it. I've seen parts of it. Yeah, I kind of come away with the same feeling. It's perfectly serviceable. There's nothing exceptionally good or bad about it. It's just a middle-of-the-road slasher movie that does its job.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you. It is very derivative of Scream. Like, it feels like the creators of this film, like Jim Gillespie, saw Scream and was like, all right, let's I'm gonna make my own here. And it's just, it doesn't have any of that sort of style or panache that Scream does. It all feels very by the book. Like, the characters aren't that interesting. The killer, as Adam said, not very compelling. He's got a big hook thing.
Yeah, they're basically phoning it in, is what, like, I gather from it. And I think their big moneymaker here was, I mean, this was kind of Jennifer Love Hewitt's introduction, like it's her first big role, and I think they were kind of putting a lot of the weight on her shoulders as far as pushing the movie's popularity and basically her looks and her cleavage.
Yeah, a lot of revealing clothing in this, like egregiously revealing. Like, why are they dressed like that? I had to ask myself that multiple times, but I think that this is. They clearly picked Jennifer Love Hewitt because you have Nev Campbell in Scream, right? And then they were like, okay, well, let's keep the Party of Five vibe going here. So then we have Jennifer Love Hewitt starring in a very similar movie, but the difference between Nev Campbell and Jennifer Love Hewitt in these movies is so drastic. Like, I don't find Jennifer Love Hewitt's character very compelling or even likable. I find her to be pretty grating in this.
Nobody really has all that much of a presence.
Yeah, I mean, you have Jennifer Love Hewitt starring, you have Sarah Michelle Gellar. Now, I think this is maybe just after she started doing Buffy. I think Buffy started in 96, if I'm not mistaken. So she just started Buffy pretty recently. And of course, she plays like the slutty one. And then you have Freddie Prinze Jr.
Who's just there. He just stands there with his mouth open. Does nothing.
I feel like he was trying to do this. Does. He was trying to do this like sort of New England accent, maybe, throughout this, and it didn't really work because he kept dropping it, and that didn't really fit. But I think that the whole point of his character is he was supposed to be like the worker, he's the blue collar friend, whereas the other ones were like the elites. They were like the social elites. And you had Ryan Phillippe as the jock. He was kind of the bully jock of the bunch.
I do like the implication that the working class guy has the New England accent, despite the fact that this movie takes place in North Carolina.
Right, yeah. Which is, I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the second one, I still know what he did last summer, takes place in the Bahamas. And I had a really hard time understanding how the locations were working with that, because it seemed like Freddie Prinze Jr. gets down to the Bahamas so quickly in that movie.
The title sequence of this movie and its 2 sequels are incredible. There's I Know What You Did, and then I Still Know What You Did, and then I'll Always Know What You Did.
So I did watch all 3 of them in preparation for this, and I will say that the other 2 are not even okay. The first one I don't think is very good. Like, I wouldn't recommend watching the first one, but the second 2 are even worse, like a lot worse, especially the third one. The third one is utterly abysmal in every way.
Because
So if you-
everybody knows. Everybody always knows what you did last summer. There's nothing else to prove.
I completely forgot they made a third one.
It was straight
I know
to
I didn't see
DVD, and it came out. Yeah, it came out in 2006. This was the first time I ever saw the third one, and it doesn't feature any of the original cast. It's completely new, and the funny thing is, it came out in 2006, but it looks more dated than the other two. It's so awful.
Here's one thing I noticed, especially in comparison to Scream, is that the murders here are not graphic whatsoever. There's hardly any blood. There's no, you don't show like knives going in. Like, there's no blood spatter. Like anything. Like, these are the cleanest murders I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple moments. The one dude gets the fish hook.
That's probably
in the
the
mouth
most graphic one. I would
thing.
say that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was Johnny Galecki when he got.
Yes.
Yes.
Max.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was his unfortunate demise. But the kills weren't quite as inventive as Scream. They weren't as fun. And whereas Scream uses horror movie tropes to sort of provide the scares, this movie uses like the old urban legend of the person with the hook hand. So this is sort of trying to capitalize on urban legends. This is, of course, before the movie Urban Legend came out.
And they kind of started with that theme with them telling the urban legends at the beginning of the movie on the beach, and I feel like they didn't really follow through with that. Not so
Not
much.
really.
Yeah, I guess it was to implant the idea that many urban legends start in some minuscule grain of truth, and then they tie that into this is like the hook, but this hook does not have a hook. There's no hook to this movie.
And I think a lot of it tried to play into the copious amounts of red herrings that you had in this movie. A lot of teen slashers during this time just bombarded you with red herrings, and they were constantly trying to set you off track, right? Like, first you think that it's Freddie Prinze Jr., then could it be Ryan Phillippe because his jacket's gone, all this stuff, and it none of it really worked. Like, I never actually thought that the killer could be one of these other people.
Well, it's definitely poor writing. I mean, they had that whole scene where they just started pointing fingers at each other out of nowhere. It was like, are you guys serious right now? You guys are automatically like accusing each other of being killers, like right off the bat.
And then they try to make you think for a second that it's Anne Heche for some reason. Like that
creepy
doesn't
sister?
really work. That it's yeah.
Why is there a creepy sister in this movie? I feel like there's always some sort of character like that in all these movies.
Presumably for the express purpose of having another red herring.
Revisiting it just doesn't. For me, this movie doesn't hold up. I don't know if I ever liked this to begin with. To be honest with you, I loved Scream. I loved the whole Scream series pretty much. But this one was just, it felt like a knockoff. It really did. And
it's a tad astounding that this movie caught on so much, because it is so generic. I guess it was riding off the pre-established nature of some of its stars, but there's basically nothing here to hold on to, and it commanded 2 sequels.
Yeah. So this one has a 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. I Still Know What You Did has a 7.
Ooh.
And I'll Always Know What You Did has a 0. So the coveted 0.
That's an achievement in itself.
It's just not good. You can watch a lot of these movies and get enjoyment out of them, even if they're not the best. And I think that we'll be revisiting that idea later on in the show. But this one just felt boring to me. There wasn't any kind of hook that, no pun intended, that sort of grabbed me.
The hook doesn't have a hook.
I guess
Yeah.
I would say the closest thing to that is probably the twist as to who the murderer was, and the fact that the brother really did die, but he was actually killed by the father of his fiance or something like that.
Yeah, I felt like that. The twist, the reveal was just so convoluted. Like
they try to squeeze another 3 red herrings into the twist.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
It's a decent twist, but the reveal is very underwhelming.
Yeah, I feel like they sort of bungled the reveal because at the end, you know, there's all these red herrings and twists and things that are happening, and you're like, oh, is it this person? Is it that person? And then, you know, she figures out who it is, but then you still have that little bit of an exposition dump there at the end where it's all laid out in front of us. Any final thoughts from you guys on I Know What You Did Last Summer?
I would say the best thing to come out of this movie is probably that Hush Hush song, which is what the song is known for.
All of the inexplicable 90s covers of late 60s rock.
Did you notice that like a lot of these movies, a lot of these teen horror movies to cover older songs? They love doing that, bringing in covers. I also noticed that The Offspring is on 3 of the 3 soundtracks. 3 soundtracks of the 4 movies that we're talking about.
I actually made a note of that. I'm like, Offspring again. Like, every single one. He's even in one of the movies.
Yeah, they're even in one of the movies.
I remember reading Roger Ebert's review of this movie, and he was pretty adamant that the only good shot in this movie was like the opening sequence, like the long, like wide, like aerial shot over the cliffs and the ocean and all of that. But I didn't even think that was a very good shot because it had that inexplicable like doom metal cover of Summer Breeze over it, and I just started bursting out laughing from like frame 1.
Yeah. I think the best shot in this movie is one that takes place on in the school on the stage. I don't know if it's in the school, but it's on the stage, and it's Sarah Michelle Gellar and Ryan Phillippe talking behind this like backdrop, and the camera pulls in, and then there's lights that turn on so that you can actually see through the backdrop, and we see their conversation through the backdrop.
That's a good shot. I like that.
I think that that's a genuinely good shot. Like, that was one of the only actual artistic shots I think that existed in this movie. That is I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Now it's time for the Pizza Head Show.
Hey, everybody! I'm done trick-or-treating, and now I'm gonna go for a stuffed crust pizza at Pizza Hut. Yay!
Not yet, Pizza Head. There's one more place to go.
I don't think anyone's home.
Sure there is.
Hello, trick-or-treat! Interesting hieroglyphics on this pizza.
Quick, Pizza Head, let's go upstairs.
Hey, who lives here anyway?
It's your host, Count Steve.
Oh, nice place. You gotta... I wanna go to Pizza Hut now!
The Count will be happy to give you a lift.
Hey, put me down! Put me down!
See you next time.
Boo!
Adam, do you remember those commercials? The Pizza Head commercials?
Yeah.
That was a lot just now.
Yeah, there were so many of them that they released, and it was definitely, if you are familiar with Mr. Bill on the old SNL, there would be these sketches called Mr. Bill, and it's definitely pulled from that. They were ridiculous.
These commercials bring up more nostalgia than the movies do.
Sometimes, yeah. Because I think with the commercials, many of them were played so much, you know, they were burned into your brain because they were on so much.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I guess that was their point, wasn't it?
Sure, yeah. Make you love that Pizza Hut. The director of our next film would go on to win Emmys for his work on Game of Thrones and Band of Brothers, but before handling epics on HBO, David Nutter was working with Fox on shows like The X-Files and Millennium. In 1998, he took a break from the small screen and directed a teen horror film starring a pack of up-and-coming young actors, including James Marsden, Katie Holmes, and Nick Stahl, released on July 24th. This is Disturbing Behavior.
Come sit down. This is Kathy.
Hey.
Lorna. Chug. You know Robbie and Dickie.
Dickie.
Steven's new to the Bay from Chicago.
You hate it here, don't you?
It's just different. The kids are...
Strange.
Hello. Hey.
It's like they're always smiling. They're always happy.
Kelly Connor said she saw Andy Efkin bite the head off a kitten in a fit of rage.
They're brainwashed, lobotomized, programmed. They used to be my friends.
Gavin thinks some sinister force is taking over the Cradle Bay meatheads.
A sinister force?
With every successive kid, we are getting closer and closer. Disturbing behavior.
In Disturbing Behavior, the new kid in town stumbles across something sinister about the town's method of transforming its unruly teens into upstanding citizens. So, what did we think about Disturbing Behavior? Who wants to go first?
I can go.
Right.
I liked this movie back when it came out. I remember this came out it felt like this and The Faculty came out very close to one another. I think one was like in the middle of the year and one was at the end of the year. So it's very easy to get the two of them mixed up. They're very similar films when you look at them on sort of a broad level. But
Yes.
I think that while The Faculty is a better movie, I think that this one's pretty fun. I had a good time with Disturbing Behavior.
Yeah, it was fine. I feel like I come back to that with a lot of these movies. Like, I have a letterbox list, a private letterbox list, that's every movie we've done on the show just ranked, and 3 out of the 4 movies we're talking about today are basically just fall right into the middle. In that they're perfectly serviceable movies. At least Disturbing Behavior and later The Faculty have a bit more of a involved concept. Disturbing Behavior is basically a weird channeling of the Stepford Wives.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I was going to mention that, actually. It is essentially the Stepford Wives, whereas The Faculty is either Invasion of the Body Snatchers or The Thing. I mean, they both borrow heavily from those properties. Adam, what'd you think of Disturbing Behavior?
I've only seen this movie in pieces when it first came out. So this was actually my first time watching it all the way through. I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed it much more than I Know What You Did Last Summer, that's for sure. I mean, it's got its issues here and there, I mean, dialogue-wise, but yeah, it was a fun movie. As you said, it draws a ton of, similarities to The Faculty. Another similarity is what I'm gathering, especially from this movie, The Faculty, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, is like they kind of have like a Breakfast Club theme going on where it's like these people that come together, they're all from like different social aspects. Like you got, like this one, you got your stoner, who's Nick Stahl or Gavin, and then Steve, who's, just a normal guy, and then you got Katie Holmes, who's playing like the bad girl, I guess.
Yeah, she's like the goth girl, sort of.
She's like halfway there, I guess. And you got, your jocks and stuff like that. I think that what's great about these movies, this one specifically, is how they open up with a murder scene right off the bat. It's like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up because I put a note here. What is going on with that opening scene? I just don't, even in this community where they're brainwashing their children, I just don't think a cop would cover up a double murder like that. Especially it's one of his own, it's his partner that gets killed. And he's just like, drive away, get out of here.
Pretty difficult thing to do.
I mean, come on. Like that's
the opening scene of this movie set me up for a much more bizarre movie than the one I got.
Yeah, it's just and everybody acts so nonchalant about it. Like Nick Stahl witnessed a murder, and it was like people either didn't believe him or were just completely brushing him off. And
all he had to do is go, "Hey, do you guys know where this dead cop is?
Yeah,
he's not around anymore, is he?"
It was just so ridiculous. And Nick Stahl's character in this movie is an enigma. I don't understand. I really don't understand what his character is saying half the time. Like, what is going on with the lingo that he uses?
Can I touch on that? Because there's a quote he says in the movie that sticks out to me. And for some reason, I feel like I've heard it. And it could have been something I heard in the preview when the movie came out. It says, the problem with America is mankind's abject unwillingness to contribute to the delinquency of minors. Mm-hmm. And I actually love that quote. I thought it was great. I don't know why he's going around making quotes like that. But
I also wrote down a quote from Nick Stahl, and he just goes, "That sounds Razor."
Yes.
He goes, "That sounds Razor." And I'm like, oh, that's listen, I grew up in the 90s. Nobody said that sounds a razor. I don't think that's an actual thing.
It definitely feels a lot some middle-aged screenwriter getting his impression of what the kids sound like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It could have been a regional thing. Katie Holmes was saying it too, and I actually made a note where I said, I've never heard the term razor before this movie.
Yeah, maybe it was. Where's this? This is in Ohio, right? This takes place in Ohio, I believe.
No, that was the faculty.
That was the faculty.
I think this took place in
some bay, right? Didn't it say it was the bay?
Was it Washington State or something?
I thought it was the Northwest. It took place.
Yeah. The Wikipedia synopsis says the Puget Sound, so Washington State.
Okay. So, yeah, so James Marsden and his sister moved there from Chicago, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I believe Chicago. And
yep.
So he's sort of the fish out of water. He's getting to know everybody, and he falls in with Katie Holmes and Nick Stahl, who are sort of the outcasts of the school, which in and of itself doesn't really fit with James Marsden's character as Steve.
He's an extremely normal guy.
Yeah, he seems like he would fit in better with the jocks, but I guess he's had a little bit of a troubled past, and that's why he gravitates towards the bad kids. I do love Bruce Greenwood's mustache in this. He had a pretty wicked mustache going on. He was the evil doctor that was turning those brainwashing these kids. And the byproduct of their brainwashing, of course, was that they had fits of rage every time. It was every time they got horny or something, yes. they lost it. They went insane.
I mean, who hasn't?
Yeah. I guess so. Also, I loved the opening when Nick Stahl was introducing James Marsden to all the various cliques in the school, because it seemed like he practiced that, because he so exquisitely described every little group and clique in their school.
Yeah, it was a perfect definition of every single one.
It felt very rehearsed. It was almost like in terms of rehearsed clique recital, it was like that scene in Mean Girls when they just go through the cafeteria and just pan from table to table.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it was.
In the Tony-nominated Mean Girls musical, that's an entire song.
Oh, really?
I just thought we should know that.
I'm actually interested in seeing that. I know that's veering us off track, but I will say that another sort of trend in a lot of these movies was having a twist ending. You always had to put in this twist ending, and oftentimes made no sense whatsoever. And this movie is no exception. I felt like the twist ending made absolutely no sense with Nick Stahl at the urban school, and all of a sudden he's a teacher there. I don't how'd that happen? I'm more interested in a movie where we see him, it follows him taking the steps to become a teacher at that school.
Well, I mean, they need teachers.
Sure. We always need teachers. And then they had the eye glowing at the end, as if we somehow forgot that he was brainwashed.
Yeah, we just need to see his hairdo, and we know.
And what the kids in the classroom, how did they not immediately just freak out when you see someone's eye lighting up like that?
Maybe you just get used to it.
I did think it was funny that there's a scene when dozens of children get murdered.
Yeah, I actually made a note of that too. I said pretty much everyone dies at the end.
Yeah, like you think that they're gonna get deprogrammed somehow, and it's funny because I think James Marsden even says something along the lines of like, we can try to help them, and the janitor is just like, nope, and it just drives it off a cliff.
Gotta admire that dedication to following through.
Yeah.
Can we talk about this janitor for a minute?
Please.
I mean, they're trying to... I feel like we see this character in other movies too. It's where this guy is kind of like undercover as like a simple person, or you know, and it turns out to be like they're kind of like the smart person, like seeing everything from, you know, behind the scenes and everything. And I just feel like they're trying to convey that idea about him, but they never really even followed through as much as they should have with that aspect, you know? Like, he never really made his transformation into, like, the guy that he really actually is. He just ended up killing everyone.
Yeah, you do see that a lot in movies where there's, like, that one person, the outsider of the group who's sort of on the periphery that they know exactly what's going on. Like, he knows exactly what's happening to these kids. And he's reading Kurt Vonnegut, and he's actually smart. And James Marsden sees I think he was reading Slaughterhouse-5, and he's like, "Hey, you're not a dummy. You're smart."
He sees his inner beauty.
And the rat signals drive them crazy, apparently.
Oh yeah, I mean that was some real foreshadowing right there when they introduced that.
Of
You knew
course.
that was going to be a factor.
Chekhov's signal.
Yeah, you knew immediately. You knew immediately what was going on with that. It's not a good movie. Like, I fully realized that this is not a good film, but maybe it's a nostalgia thing, but I just had a good time with it. I think it's dumb, but it's fun.
I would say my favorite part, and I think this is the most I don't know what you call it, cinematic scene to me, is when they corner the guy. You remember the guy at the beginning? He's like the bad boy that has like the nice car and everything. He works on cars. He's like a greaser.
Yeah.
I guess they call him.
Like the first guy that we see them turn.
They all like circle him, like, and they have like hockey sticks and stuff like that. Like, I actually thought that scene was kind of cool. And I'm like, because that's some creepy stuff. Like, to be like outnumbered by a bunch of like jocks with all their sports equipment.
Jocks with their sports. There is also that one sort of iconic scene where all of the blue sweater people are standing, and you have that fog behind them with the light that I guess is supposed to be like the moonlight, and they're all lined up ready to go. And I love the scene when James Marsden's parents give him up or sign him up for the program, and they come to pick him up, and his parents they just let it go. Like, the fact that these people are like physically assaulting their child, and they're just like, all right.
I mean, it's part of the process.
He needs help, so
it's for the best. It's for his own good.
There's just so many things that happen where I'm like, there's no way that would happen. There's no way a parent would allow that for their child. There's no way a cop would allow that. It's just silly. Everything's...
I mean, if we talk about things that would break an entire state, and just break an entire state government at least, and they just get brushed off as if it's nothing, we will have a lot to talk about in our next movie.
Oh yeah. Any final thoughts, Ken, on disturbing behavior?
I was not disturbed, but I wasn't upset.
Yeah, it actually wasn't that disturbing. To me, the only scene that was even remotely creepy was the scene when I think his name was it Chunk? When Chunk cornered Katie Holmes in the basement, when he kind of freaked out. That was really the only scene that I thought.
Never trust somebody named Chunk.
Yeah.
that guy in particular was I feel like we all knew some guy like that was just like a crazy like just person that would snap like that, you know?
Sure.
Like I feel like we all knew someone like that. So I mean, I think that's the creepiest aspect of that guy. But my biggest takeaway from this movie would be that I was very happy to see James Marsden's character not be screwed over by a woman by the end of the movie, because I feel like every movie this guy is in, he's the nice guy and gets screwed over. The woman leaves him for another guy or something. It happened in X-Men, and it happened in Superman Returns. It happened another movie I can't think of right now.
That did happen to him a lot earlier on in his career. I think just
he's killed constantly in Westworld.
Just his overall demeanor. He's just that kind of character where he looks like the boy next door and isn't. I think that inherently makes him killable.
Right.
There's some weird proto-incel subtext going on with these characters.
So in that regard, this movie was way ahead of its time.
Oh yeah,
way ahead of its time.
It was a very carefully masked warning about what was going to happen.
All right. Anything else? Any final thoughts?
I would say it had the most suspenseful opening credits.
It definitely had that sort of 90s techno vibe to it, those opening credits.
Yeah.
Where it's like they were using computers to make opening credits, but they still weren't quite sure the best way to do it.
Oh, and they were using like the spooky fonts and, you know, like the shaky like camera font like thing, you know?
Yeah, I feel like everything in any thriller or horror movie back then, it was all just derivative of the opening titles to Seven. Like everything was just had that where there was everything was so busy and you had to like shaking and everything was like they would like put things out of focus and
oh yeah,
many layers.
Basically make cerebral. The credits as unreadable as possible.
Yeah. There we go. That's the most disturbing thing about disturbing behavior is the the migraine-inducing opening credits. Stay tuned for more Saved by the 90s Halloween special after this quick commercial break.
They're coming to your neighborhood.
You're not the pizza guy.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors! Now playing on Sega Genesis and Super NES. A 55-level feeding frenzy of time-cut creature features. Fend off bee-moving maniacs with your weed whackers, exploding soda pop, and boozy squirt gun. Save the neighbors! Or they're dead meat. Zombies Ate My Neighbors! From Konami.
Hey boils and ghouls, we're back with another Cheater's Corner to put you in the Halloween spirit with a code that'll take you to the next level in Zombies Ate My Neighbors for Super Nintendo. At the title screen, go to the password menu and put in XDSJ to get access to the game's 3 bonus levels. Now, get out there and save your neighborhood.
1998 also brought with it another teen horror film involving high schoolers fighting to overcome their oppressive parental figures, this time under the direction of Robert Rodriguez and written by Scream screenwriter Kevin Williamson. Released on Christmas Day, this is The Faculty.
The students at Harrington High have always suspected their teachers were from another planet.
Is this going to be on the test?
This is the test.
This time, they're right now. These 6 students won't just question authority. They'll have to destroy it. The faculty.
Please report to the principal's office.
In The Faculty, a group of students suspect that their teachers are aliens after bizarre occurrences. Ken, we'll start with you. What did you think of The Faculty?
This movie has to hold some kind of record for most things happening within its insular little world that seemed to affect the rest of society in no way whatsoever. There's so much happening here. There are people turning into aliens, like just mangled corpses appearing, and I am not entirely aware that most of the town knew what was going on. I don't think most of the high school knew what was going on.
Definitely not. Yeah, so this is, again, it's sort of an invasion of the body snatchers / the Thing. Very, very much. I guess I sort of didn't think about how similar it was to the Thing until I watched it this time.
So we saw the crawling head.
Yeah, I mean that and just the test scene, that was pretty much lifted directly from the Thing, and also the way in which the parasite takes over the body with the sort of tendrils, the wavy tendrils, felt very, very much as like an homage to Carpenter's version of the Thing. I liked this movie. I think this movie actually holds up pretty nicely today. Even though it came out in 98, there's a decent amount of CG in it, and it actually doesn't look too bad to me, at least.
It looks all right.
Adam, what did you think about the effects work in this movie?
I thought it was great, and it does still hold up. And I thought, seeing especially the reveal of the alien in full, it's pretty cool looking design. It was pretty realistic looking. It wasn't like super, because a lot of these older movies, when they have the CG monster or whatever, like, you can clearly tell. I mean, this thing's like a cartoon in the middle of this movie. Mm-hmm. So I think that they did a great job with that. But I love this movie. I've loved it since the first time I saw it. I'm realizing now, when watching again, how stacked it is with so many actors. Oh my God.
Yeah, there's a lot of
them.
A lot of people in this movie. So you had Jordana Brewster, Clea Duvall, Josh Hartnett was in there, Selma Hayek, Famke Jensen, Piper Laurie, Elijah Wood, Usher was in there, which is funny because he's featured on the poster, I believe, and yet the main, I don't even see him on here. The main guy is not on the poster.
You talking about Elijah Wood, right?
No, Elijah Wood's on there.
Oh, is he?
He's on there, but the football player.
Sean Hatosi? Stan?
Yeah, I think that's him. So you had a really great cast. I mean, Jon Stewart was in there too.
I enjoyed seeing Jon Stewart
playing one of the teachers, and of course we can't forget the one and only Harry Knowles was in there. I don't know if you caught that, Ken.
I have rarely been less okay with something than just when Harry Knowles appeared in this movie. Like, I was so not okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, clearly this is a Robert Rodriguez film. This is definitely that was like an Austin homage, and I was not okay with Harry Knowles being in this movie. I totally forgot that he was in this movie. He doesn't have any speaking lines or anything, thankfully. But I guarantee that Robert Rodriguez now regrets having him in this movie.
Yeah. I think a lot of people regret having Harry Knowles in their professional projects.
Yeah. Ken, what was your overall feeling about the film and the sort of the trajectory that it took, like where it went?
It manifests all the different levels of kind of what we're discussing here, this sort of post-Scream horror, because, yeah, you mentioned in our last review that it had lots of parallels to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and in that kind of Kevin Williamson way, there are whole stretches of dialogue in here that are just people talking about, like, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So this definitely feels a lot more of a movie made in the post-Scream vein than even the other Kevin Williamson penned movie, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which feels like more of a pre-Scream movie. This one feels definitively in that post-Scream kind of meta-horror world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they were pretty on the nose with their references and things in this, but it didn't that didn't really bring it down necessarily, because I thought that they did things pretty well overall. Like I mentioned, the testing scene. So essentially they believe that aliens are taking over their teachers, and they discover that these aliens are sort of aquatic in that they require lots of water in order to stay alive. So they discover that Josh Hartnett is selling essentially caffeine pills to kids, and it's because they're diuretics. If you happen to have one of these aliens ingest this stuff, it kills them. So they did this great sequence where they all of the kids, and again, like Adam said, this is the type of movie where it's like the jock and the nerd and all of these people from different cliques end up joining forces, and they all have to snort this stuff in order to see if they're an alien or not. And of course, one of them is, and that was, even though you sort of expected it to happen, it was still a fun surprise, because it
plays pretty well.
It wasn't a character you expected to be infected with it. So that was cool. But I also want to go back to what you were saying, Ken, about the sort of the gravity of the situation that they're in. Like, essentially, Elijah Wood saves the world in this movie.
Yes.
Like, everything is happening at this one school, pretty much entirely on the school grounds. And it is such a huge thing that the fate of the world is at stake.
Is literally dependent on this thing remaining contained but not very well hidden in the school. And maybe 10% of the student body at the most would have been directly aware of this, it feels like. Like, it's only like there's some transition point between the action and the epilogue to which nobody knows about this, to then everybody on the planet knows about this, and there's like a whole permanent media contingent camped out in this town just grabbing onto this, quirky little alien invasion story.
I have a hard time swallowing that. Like, do you think that the media would really believe any of that? I mean, even if a whole town said, yeah, this actually happened, do you think that the media would be like, all right, yeah, let's run it?
I have no idea. There is very little context with this movie. It is like, of course you don't really need context in this specific sense that you expect context, but there's very little placement for this world. It's not exactly clear how everything is related to each other.
This is a movie that I would like to see a sequel. I'd like to see a sequel for this one. I know it'll never happen at this point, but I feel like, first of all, I think that this is the best of the 4 films that we're covering this month. And I think that it is just sort of the perfect encapsulation of this post-Scream horror, teen horror. And we just don't see that many of these movies anymore. They're pretty few and far between. It's funny, I say this, but Hellfest literally came out this past weekend, and that is very much a teen horror movie. But I think that one of the big differences is that these kids are smart. Like, these kids, they put things together. They're cognizant of the situation that they're in, and they take active steps in fixing the problem. Like Josh Hartnett's character, he's this like slacker, he has to repeat 12th grade or whatever, but he's this sort of idiot savant, I guess. And you have kids that are making good decisions, and I think that something happened along the way with teen horror movies where you don't really have that anymore. nowadays, whenever you have a slasher movie or a teen horror movie, they're just dumb, and they're essentially just bodies that are ready to be disposed of or dispatched, you know. But I think that in all of these movies, like Nick Stahl's character and Disturbing Behavior, even to a lesser extent, I think Jennifer Love Hewitt's character in I Know What You Did Last Summer, like they're pretty smart kids. And I think something happened that you don't really see that anymore.
It's like they're not helpless against, you know, the threat.
Sure. Yeah. But I feel like nowadays it's just dumb kids getting killed. And maybe that's because more slasher movies and things these days are hearkening back to like the 80s style, where all of the people were sort of just dumb, horny kids.
Yeah, they're just essentially bags of meat.
Yeah.
But yeah, this like late 90s, this sort of, especially the post-Scream era, had these very savvy, self-aware, resourceful characters, and that generally makes for more interesting adversaries to mortal villains, because I mean, you do think back to all of the endless horror franchises of the 80s, and it doesn't matter how smart or dumb the characters are, the killer is just going to come back next time. So I think a benefit of making a movie ostensibly standalone without the pressure and believing that it's going to spawn 11 sequels is that you can create more interesting character dynamics, because it in effect will operate as a standalone story.
Yeah, I think a good example is Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. That was a movie that sort of was different than the previous two, and it was sort of in a lot of ways different than the ones that would come after it, where this was a group of very resourceful kids who they knew what they wanted to do, and they had the means to go after, you know, this killer, and they were smart about it. I mean, obviously it didn't work out great for him in the end, but it's I think that's one of the reasons that one is one of the best in the series. Adam, do you have any other thoughts on The Faculty?
I mean, you guys already touched on a lot of it. I think going back to what Ken was saying about it being unknown to pretty much known to the world is that's kind of like an overall theme of all these movies, is they take place in small towns. So, and plus at that time you don't really have social media, so I mean, things like this can get away, or they can get away with things like this being in a small town. You know, they're a little more isolated. This movie's
right.
I mean, it's a hybrid of so many movies, and I think this is just Robert Rodriguez like being very obvious about it. It's a homage to so many different movies. You have The Thing, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Puppet Masters, definitely, Breakfast Club for sure. I mean, you have all the same characters here as you had in The Breakfast Club. Exactly. I do want to talk about Josh Hartnett's character a little bit, Zeke. And first off, I think the name Zeke is hilarious. I mean, they just wanted to give him a very extreme name. Start with a Z.
Zeke.
You know,
Zeke
you
Tyler.
But I think he executed that role like so well. It was like very convincing. Like, and you know, again, like this is one of those kids I think we all knew, especially in the 90s. I mean, there was a kid just like this that lived down the street from me growing up. He was probably like, I don't know, 8 years older than me. He's made me try Zima for the first time. So we all knew kids like this. But yeah, it's definitely my favorite out of all the movies as well. It just touches on everything. I mean, it has the formula for a blockbuster. I mean, you have all these themes playing on. You also have, you know, Usher didn't have a big role in the movie, but they, you know, advertised that he was in the movie because that's when Usher just blew up. So it's more incentive to go and see the movie, you know?
Sure, yeah. He was huge during this time, so
oh yeah.
They definitely pushed the Usher presence, even though he was barely even in it. Like he wasn't even a main character at all. He got turned into the alien pretty quickly. It also has that iconic scene where Josh Hartnett rips the paper cutter And I love how quickly...
I was so here for that.
He's going to murder somebody.
He so quickly springs into action. Like he just instinctively knew to rip that paper cutter off of its hinge and use that as a weapon.
Just that entire fluid motion of him ripping the thing off the paper cutter, that gave me like the kind of energy rush that no movie has given me in a very long time.
I mean, that was a big part of the preview too. I remember. I mean, that was like.
Mm-hmm. This had a 53% on Rotten Tomatoes, so still considered rotten. Which,
I mean, it's better received than the other ones.
Yeah, it's the highest rated, I believe, out of all four.
Relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm. It's the closest to Fresh.
It's pretty.
It's 7 points down from Fresh.
The murders, especially at the beginning of the movie, I think they're the most Scream-like. The way the kills happen.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. That opening sequence with the principal.
Yes, even the score during it was it kind of sounded like the Scream score.
Yeah, it definitely felt very Scream-like, especially that opening with her getting killed, sort of killed and then turned.
A little killed.
Yeah, a little bit killed. I like that at the end they brought everybody, like everybody was cured. You know, they brought everybody back. And I really enjoyed the final showdown between Elijah Wood's character and the alien, where he used the retractable bleachers.
The bleachers.
Yeah. And it was a really good alien design too. Like that creature looked really good, and how it like vomited the like spores, the miniature parasites on him, and like the way it looked when they were going into his face and stuff, that all looked really cool. And the sound that they made after he killed it and they fell out of his face onto the floor, it was just such a gross sound that they made.
I really think we need to admire all of the sound people that work on movies that have to find the most disgusting sounds for these kind of effects.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't know why this got a 53%. I think that this is a genuinely fun, decent movie. It's not my favorite Rodriguez, but it's certainly not my least favorite either. I think that a lot of people forget that he even directed this movie. It's not quite the same style that he's really known for.
I mean, you can kind of get a feel for it a little bit, though.
Yeah, you can kind of see it.
It's
in there.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts on The Faculty before we move on?
Yeah, the opening scene had offspring again.
Yeah.
I think that's our recurring theme on the podcast. Is just evaluating soundtrack overlap.
This one had a pretty decent soundtrack. It did have that cover of the Pink Floyd song. I believe that was this one.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think we now need to have, in addition to our regular hypothetical future soundtrack episode, just an entire additional episode on covers of songs on 90s soundtracks.
I know that. I mean, really, the soundtrack thing, there's just so much going on with these 90s soundtracks. It's just insane. I listen to a lot of most of these movies. I listen to their soundtracks in preparation just to take me back, and most of them are pretty good.
Are you watching Are You Afraid of the Dark? In the dark? Well, what are you afraid of? What's so terrifying about Tales of the Unknown, the unseen, and the undead? After all, there is nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light. Or is there? Tune in for another tale of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Tomorrow at 7:30, 6:30 Central on Nickelodeon.
Because the real terror never begins until night falls.
Halloween is always a magical time of year, not just because it's an excuse to watch more scary movies, but TV is always more fun with spooky commercials and Halloween specials.
This year, we'd like to take a look at 2 TV shows from the 90s, both of which aired on Nickelodeon throughout the decade. The first being a kids' horror anthology series which ran for 7 seasons, premiering October 31st, 1990. Submitted for the approval of Saved by the 90s, this is Are You Afraid of the Dark?
So, I was a huge fan of Are You Afraid of the Dark growing up. Adam, were you a fan of Are You Afraid of the Dark growing up?
Absolutely. I watched it all the time.
Nice. And Ken, have you ever had an experience with Are You Afraid of the Dark? Have you ever seen the show before?
I think I might have seen a couple of episodes of it here and there, just floating around and just online or in syndication or whatever over the years, but I never really made much of a note of it.
I was obsessed with this show. This was, I think, maybe one of the first SNCC shows, which it aired on Saturday nights on Nickelodeon, and it felt more adult to me. Like I was a big into horror movies even as a kid, and I liked scary things, and I felt like it was kid friendly enough that I was allowed to watch it as a youngster. But it was still, I mean, going back and watching some of them now, it's like, okay, I mean, they get into some pretty heavy topics. I think that this, compared to like Goosebumps, which was another live action anthology show that was on Fox in later on, like this one, I feel like it's a little bit darker. It's a little bit more adult than Goosebumps was. So we picked one episode. It's an early role for Ryan Gosling, actually. And also Gilbert Gottfried's in it. So, Ken, we'll start with you. What did you think of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Well, just having Ryan Gosling in it, and just, I think we talked about, off mic, just in general, about how these shows are fascinating to watch in retrospect because every Canadian child actor of the 90s appeared on the show at one point or another. It was, for Canadian child actors, what the Law and Order franchise is for every actor in the greater New York area.
Yeah, absolutely. There were so many people that got their start on Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like Jay Baruchel was on like 4 episodes of the show. The other people are Nev Campbell, I think, was on, but this episode was called the Tale of Station 109.1. It aired during season 5. So season 5 was 95 to 96. And I just sort of randomly picked this because it was one of Ryan Gosling's first roles. He wasn't even the main character in this. He played the brother of the kid. And the episode was about this kid named Chris who was fascinated with death. And he discovers this radio station that seemed kind of creepy. So he looks it up on the internet and tracks down this radio station. It turns out that it's the DJ is played by Gilbert Gottfried, and he sort of guides people into the afterlife, guides spirits into the afterlife. And he mistakes this kid as one of the spirits and puts a slap bracelet on him and tries to send him into the afterlife.
Just doing his job.
I loved the slap bracelet in there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with slap bracelets, Ken, but they were a pretty big thing during this time.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? I don't know if this happened at your school, Adam, where like slap bracelets were so big. Like everybody had tons of slap bracelets. And I remember I used to wear like 4 or 5 of them up my arm at any given time. And they ended up banning them because kids were getting hurt. Kids were
slapping each other with them.
Yeah, they were getting injured because of these slap bracelets, which are essentially a piece of metal, like a metal band that was shaped into a bracelet. And when you straighten them out, they sort of click, and you slap them onto your wrist, and they reform into the bracelet.
Doesn't seem like there could be any unforeseen consequences from that.
Yeah, because what would happen is eventually, so there were ones that were sort of plastic and then ones that had like fabric covering them. But what would happen is after so many slaps, the fabric starts to wear off. So you have these like sharp metal pieces that get exposed and end up cutting you. They end up cutting these kids up.
I just remember taking it and trying to snap it across like anything, like the desk leg or something like that, or I'll just try to snap the very end of it and like hook on something. I never actually wore them like for style purposes or anything like that.
Oh, you're too cool for that, I see.
Yeah, I wasn't cool enough for that, I think.
They had all kinds of different designs and stuff. I remember I had this one that was sort of like holographic. They were ridiculous. Adam, what did you think of this episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Well, at first I thought it was very morbid. I was like, oh wow, like my first thought is, because I watched the show, but honestly I don't remember a lot of the shows. I was like, wow, I can't see it happening like that in a new show. To where, the opening scene with the kid is like, it kind of looks like he's in a coffin at a funeral.
Yeah.
Like when he wakes up. I mean, that's the whole idea that they're trying to convey. And I'm like, I don't know if they would end up getting away with that nowadays. With everything being so PC as it is. I appreciate that they did it like that. But that's the first thing that stuck out to me. I mean, it's real cheesy stuff and it's very kiddie, but at the same time, they do a great job of taking such a morbid and creepy theme and just like cheesing the hell out of it.
Sure, yeah, they made it fun. They made it a little bit more kid friendly. I would say I agree with you that a show like Are You Afraid of the Dark probably wouldn't exist in today's social climate. I'm just not sure that they would make something like that. Especially this episode was more tame than some of them. Some of them are significantly darker. And I learned that, so if you're not familiar with the show, the way that it's bookended is it's a group of kids called the Midnight Society, and they sit around a campfire and they tell each other scary stories every week. And throughout the years, the members of the Midnight Society changed. Like they'll get more members, they'll lose members, et cetera, et cetera. But one interesting thing is that each member that tells a story, they have their own style. So if you like one person's stories, like all of their stories, whenever they circle back to them, they all have sort of similar themes to them, which is something I never really realized or picked up on as a kid, that each kid telling a story has their own style. And some of them were definitely darker than others. I would say that this one was a little bit lighter than most. I liked Gilbert Gottfried as the DJ. That was just a nice little treat. He was
very fun.
Yeah, he was pretty funny in it. And I love his DJ voice. The one thing that I'll say about a lot of these episodes is that they feel very truncated. Like they feel like they're almost too short. Like the story is not quite, they don't have enough time, because you have the bookends, which are like maybe 3 minutes each, but even so, that's like 6 minutes off of a 20-minute show. And I feel like they just don't have quite enough time to get it all done and to develop a decent story. So a lot of these episodes feel very rushed. Like they're going through them and they're just super, super rushed. A lot of them have morals to them. They play out very much like kid-friendly versions of Tales from the Crypt. And some episodes are longer. They have like 2 parts to them, like for the longer stories. So that's cool too. I mean, Kent, does this give you the desire to watch more Are You Afraid of the Dark in the future?
Not terribly, although I certainly didn't dislike it. But it's just, it is... I like the idea. I like the notion that who, depending on who's telling the story, there's going to be a different style to it. So perhaps I'll come back to it at some point.
I will say that I don't think these hold up quite as good as some other 90s properties, one of which we'll be getting into next. I think that they feel very cheesy, as Adam said. They're pretty. They're very Canadian. I'll put it that way as well. They're very Canadian.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just with with our age and just how what the culture is now, it doesn't translate as well, no matter whether we watch them as kids or not. I mean, I even get it. It was a little bit nostalgic, but still, it's like, like some things I'll go back and watch that I used to watch, and I still enjoy it. And I don't think this is one of those things.
Yeah, I think maybe some other episodes could feel more nostalgic and maybe translate better to modern times. This specific episode, it didn't really work necessarily. Like, the story was just kind of lame. I mean, what I told you, like the 1-sentence synopsis, like that's the whole story. Like, there's not a lot there. I think that Gilbert Gottfried is the best part. I mean, he's the character that sort of holds everything together. Ryan Gosling doesn't do a whole lot in this. He looks very much like a 90s kid, though. Like, he's got that amazing haircut, and when I think generally of all my friends back then, they all looked like that. Like, that's what I think.
Earrings in the left ear and everything.
Yeah, like just the clothes that they were wearing, like oversized t-shirts, and just everything about it felt very conducive of the era.
Short sleeve flannel shirt.
Heck yeah.
Open
flannel everywhere.
The white shirt underneath.
Open flannel everywhere. I still think that the intro is really good on that show.
It is great. Yeah, that's probably when I saw the intro, I kind of got excited for. I was like, "Ooh, I haven't seen this in a long time."
Yeah, but unfortunately, the show itself feels pretty rough. Feels pretty dated. I might go back and watch some more of these. I think that they have a bunch of episodes on YouTube that you can watch. I think Nickelodeon or Nick Splat has episodes, because I don't know if they still do Nick Splat, but for a while there was a Nickelodeon channel that was all 90s stuff. Like, everything they did was from the 90s era, so they would replay Are You Afraid of the Dark and Pete and episodes like that, Salute Your Shorts, and all the Nicktoons from back then. I'm not sure if that's still around, but Are You Afraid of the Dark is definitely pretty easy to find online. The next show that we're going to talk about is not so easy to find online. So
no, I can tell you from experience.
Let's move on and talk about that. So next up, we have one of my favorite shows of the 90s, and one that I hope to cover in more depth in a future episode. It began as a series of minute-long shorts that played as interstitials in between shows on Nickelodeon in 1989 before airing 5 specials and becoming a series in 1993. Today, we're going to take a look at Halloweeny, which was the 7th episode of the show's 2nd season. Join us as we dive into the existential world of the adventures of Pete and Pete.
The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
Starring Pete, Pete's brother Pete, and me, Ellen. Today's adventure, Halloween.
So, Ken, this is your first experience with Pete and Pete? I think, Adam, you said that this is your first experience with the adventures of
yes,
Pete and
Pete.
Yes, it
is.
Too.
I knew of it, but this is the first time I've ever watched an episode.
I gotta say, as I said in the intro, I loved this show. I still love this show. I think it's one of the most underrated shows of the 90s. Ken,
it's very good.
Ken, okay, so you thought you enjoyed it, you liked it?
I had a very good time with this. I think you covered it pretty well. There is something quietly existential about the entire concept of the show. I mean, even the title, The Adventures of Pete and Pete. They're both named Pete. Why? Because they are.
Yeah.
So it kind of sets you up there, and it's all of these journeys through just casually exaggerated versions of suburbia that always have this feel to it that anything might happen, or has happened, or could happen. There's just this very great flow to the entire thing that it's almost calming. There's something weirdly reassuring and comforting about this essentially giant existential crisis of a show.
I completely agree. I think that there is something comforting about it. There's something that just really hits home for me in this show. I guess maybe it's like something that I can relate to, but I just love that they live in this little microcosm on their street, and they have these huge grand conflicts that happen, but they're not. They're like the smallest things in the grand scheme of things, but they evoke such huge topics and discussion. And I just there's something very special about this show. Adam, what did you think of this specific episode, and maybe your thoughts on the show as a whole?
It was interesting. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's quirky. It kind of reminded me of Malcolm in the Middle a little bit. The way it was narrated.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. Maybe Malcolm in the Middle bit off of this show a little bit, but
I think so. I don't know. It was just fun, like it didn't take itself too seriously. And again, like it was very short. I mean, it does feel rushed, kind of like Are You Afraid of the Dark is. Mm-hmm. It had a little more content because it didn't have all the the campfire scene and all that, but no, it was definitely interesting. It just, I never seen any other episodes, so it's hard for me to really make something of it.
There is a point at which so much is getting built up for, as you said, just so little consequence that there's just almost an absurdist element to it all. It's like a kid's waiting for Godot sometimes. There's just so much going back and forth between these characters over conflicts that are basically abstract ideas.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there is an absolute absurdist quality to the show, especially if you see other episodes. You will see that they fully embrace the absurdist nature of the show. Like some things will happen that are like supernatural, and just random things will occur that don't exist in this world, and they just accept it. Like that's just part of this narrative.
Yeah, like when he smashes the pumpkin and somehow that pumpkin gang or whatever finds out.
Yeah. So yeah, so this episode that we watched is their Halloween special. Well, actually, I don't think it was a special. It was just an episode that aired during the second season. It was Big Pete loses his Halloween spirit, and he gets enticed by this gang called the Pumpkin Eaters. Want him to join them, and they wear these giant pumpkins on their heads, and they go around town smashing pumpkins and terrorizing the neighborhood, and like beating up the little kids, and then the sort of Little Pete plot, because usually the way that the show goes is Big Pete's working on something, Little Pete's working on something, and Little Pete is trying to set the record for number of houses visited during Trick or Treat. I can't remember what the number was, but it was ridiculous. It was like 400 houses or something. And so he was trying to do this all the while avoiding the Pumpkin Eaters. And it's just, this isn't my favorite episode of the show, but I think that it gives you a good idea of what kind of show this is. And I think maybe people disregard it just because it was a Nickelodeon show, but when you watch it now, I feel like this is a show that can hold up. It is very 90s, but the topics that it deals with, I think, can translate to today in a really fun way.
That's definitely part of the appeal, at least for this one episode for me, was just because there's so much stuff happening in a given episode, from the sample, is that there's a kind of timelessness to it all, because it less becomes about individual events than rather this confluence of, on paper, completely bizarre, over-the-top situations that all just sort of fold onto each other.
Yeah, and a lot of the themes, although they revolve around this sort of ridiculous premise, be it the pumpkin eaters and Pete deciding that he hates Halloween and wants to smash pumpkins or whatever, they often will deal with broader topics in them, right? So like, even though it's specifically about this thing, it's also about Pete becoming older and not wanting to go trick-or-treating anymore, and the effect that has on his little brother, stuff like that.
I like the relationship that they have. It seems very realistic as far as like a brother to brother relationship.
Yeah, they're brothers, but they're also best friends, and that's a topic that gets explored more as the show goes on, as Pete gets older and starts like dating and stuff like that, and how they can maintain their relationship with one of them who's 4 years older than the other. There's one really funny episode I watched the other night where it takes place in July and it's really hot, and it's like in the middle of the summer, there's a heat wave, and everybody in town was going crazy because there was this phone booth in the neighborhood, and every summer for whatever reason, the phone in the phone booth would ring, but no, it would just ring nonstop, and nobody would want to answer it because it had been ringing since like 1976, and and rumors started circulating that like if you answer it, it'll like eat your soul and all of this stuff. So nobody wanted to answer this phone that was just constantly ringing, but at the same time, it was driving everyone insane, and they had to set up a crisis center to deal with with people who were losing their minds over this nonstop ringing phone.
Yeah, I think I need to watch every episode of the show immediately.
Yeah, it's such an amazing show. It really is. Like, as I said, I want to cover this more. I want to cover more episodes of this show on the podcast because they're so fun. They're just such a good time. Adam, do you have any desire to continue to watch The Adventures of Pete and Pete?
Actually, I mean, I wouldn't mind. I kind of just like, I like Big Pete's demeanor, and the fact that he has a very serious demeanor, but nothing about what he says is like serious. This is what makes it funny. And then, his little brother's kind of a little more over the top and vocal. I don't know if that's how they are in every episode. That's kind of the impression I was getting.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I kind of like that. I mean, I wouldn't mind giving the show a chance.
Yeah, Big Pete's played by Michael C. Morona. Little Pete's played by Danny Tamborelli. And then you had a ton of guest spots and people launching their careers, like Michelle Trachtenberg. This was like her sort of launching off point. She enters in season 2, I believe, and she's the new neighbor. She becomes friends with Little Pete, and the entire show, she has a cast on her arm. She has a broken arm for the entire rest of the show. And her dad is played by Iggy Pop.
Yeah, I noticed that. I'm like, what? is this the mother? Or wait, that's a guy. Why does he sound like that?
Yeah, it's Iggy Pop.
I thought that was really super out of place, but it made me laugh.
There's a lot of guest stars that have popped up on the show over the years. A lot of like bands, like a lot of like REM was on. Steve Buscemi played Phil Hickel, Ellen's dad. So Steve Buscemi was in a bunch of episodes. Adam West was on the show. Lots and lots of people. LL Cool J, Selma Blair.
So this is basically a 5-year-long project in introducing children to existentialism. There's a whole bunch of celebrities in it, and still nobody talks about it.
Yep, and I don't understand why. Because
yeah, this should be everybody's obsession.
I can't wrap my head around it. And some of the episodes are just so good when you watch them, because they're funny, but the themes that they tackle are, you're just like, how is this a kid's show in the 90s? Like, this is incredible.
I need so much more of this.
And the fact that it started off as just these little 1-minute short film things, and then eventually turned into this other stuff. And I think that if you're looking to get into the series, a good starting off point is, there was a special that they released. It might have been the first special that they released, and it was all about summer vacation. And that one is I think sort of the best entry point into the universe of Pete and Pete, because it explains a lot about the backstory, like Mom's plate and Petunia, Little Pete's tattoo that he has. And that's a really great episode.
Well, I guess it does make sense, because it almost reflects something about childhood. Like, when you're a kid, there's so many things that you're just told are true that as you get older you realize are just completely arbitrary. So it almost, by the nature of a show like this, works because it exaggerates that feeling of being told all these things by all the other people in your life, and then you realize that it's just sort of a thing that people decide needs to be enforced to keep order, but it's arbitrary.
Yeah, it's a great show. The Halloween episode is great, and definitely would recommend checking out The Adventures of Pete and Pete if you get a chance.
What do you get when you combine the irresistible taste of fruit snacks with the spookiness of Goosebumps? New Goosebumps fruit roll-ups with scary peel-outs. And fruit by the foot with creepy Goosebumps story teasers. So deliciously unusual, everyone will try to get their hands on them, but they're only around for a limited time. So what's really scary is running out.
Our last film this month brings a heaping dose of comedy into the teen horror genre. With Devon Sawa, Seth Green, and the unforgettable music of The Offspring, is there anything more 90s than 1999's Idle Hands?
Anton Tobias never had much on his mind, and he always had time on his hands.
4 bodies have been discovered, and the killer is still at large.
Until one of them got a mind of its own.
Sorry about your bush.
Now,
I'm gonna call 911. What's the number?
his hand won't stop.
I don't want to hurt you. Hey, don't!
His friends won't die. And the only way to stop it is to keep it busy. The comedy that dares to give scary movies the backhand. Idle Hands.
Released on April 30th, Idle Hands stars Sawa as a teenage slacker whose right hand becomes possessed with murderous intent. Adam, we'll start with you. What did you think of Idle Hands?
Sorry, I was having a really hard time not laughing out loud at the preview.
Well, you can laugh out loud at the preview. That's fine.
Okay. That was hilarious.
Yeah.
All the double entendres.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
This movie is chock full of those.
Well, this movie just starts off just again, another murder scene to open up the movie, which every other movie we've talked about has done. super over the top. Like, I kind of enjoyed it, actually. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a good movie, but it was definitely the funniest one out of everything we've seen. And again, this one stacked with a lot of big names. I mean, Jessica Alba, Seth Green, Vivica A. Fox.
Yeah, I forgot Vivica A. Fox was in this. I completely forgot about that. She's so underutilized in this movie. Like, why does she barely even exists in this movie.
There's one scene, I don't mean to jump ahead, but I don't want to forget, when Vivica A. Fox is putting together the pattern of murders, when she's on that map, she makes the pentagram. Yeah. That's what it's called, right? Yeah. So there's clearly 2 or 3 extra murders, like murder pins that she has, but she just decides to make a pentagram with 5 of them. I'm like, you just wanted to do that. You didn't have to do that.
Yeah, I remember liking this movie as a kid. This is sort of a movie designed for like 12 or 13-year-old boys, really. And I just, watching it now, man, it is a little bit rough for me to watch this now. I don't think it really holds up.
Definitely a stoner genre movie.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a stoner comedy for sure.
I feel like in that aspect it could be a cult classic.
Yeah, it does have the makings of a cult classic. I don't know if it ever achieved that status, but I would say that it has all the makings for a cult classic. Ken, what did you think of Idle Hands?
This is probably by some margin the movie that we covered this month that I just enjoyed watching the most. Maybe because I watched it in fairly close conjunction with I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is just so thoughtlessly generic. But there is something about Idle Hands which, at the very least, you can't mistake a scene from this movie with a scene from any other movie that we've talked about. You could get Disturbing Behavior and The Faculty confused with each other. You could get I Know What You Did Last Summer confused with roughly 437 other movies.
Yeah.
But Idle Hands is doing its own thing.
Yeah, it's definitely its own beast. I feel like this movie is the least like the others that we covered on this episode. It's very much more of a dark comedy than it is a horror movie, and it's just looking to have fun. Like, it's not taking itself seriously in any way, and a lot of the stuff that happens is just utterly ridiculous. I love how he has a crush. Devon Sawa plays this slacker dude. He's just a stoner. He has no ambition in life. He just wants to sit around all day and smoke weed and eat snacks and watch TV. And he has a crush on the neighbor girl played by Jessica Alba. And there's a scene when he finally goes to talk to her and she just throws herself at him. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around in what world this would be a reality where this girl would just be mindlessly throwing herself at Devon Sawa, this dude who looks like he's homeless. I had a really hard time believing that in my head.
He looks okay. He's not throw yourself at him kind of attractive, but he's harmless.
He's got that Sawa, Sawa charm.
Yeah, he had a whole run of movies around this time. Like, there's a lot happening around this time for Devon Sawa, and there is a kind of presence that he has in this and even in Final Destination that you could not easily replace with any other run-of-the-mill actor of his type, but I can't quite pinpoint what it is. There's something about him that works between both movies to the extent that it can work.
Yeah, I really enjoyed him in the Final Destination, and he had a small role in SLC Punk, which was he had a good role in that as well. And I think he definitely had a really great run during this time. He was in tons of movies, and then he just sort of fell off the face of the earth. I'm not sure exactly what happened with him. He really hasn't been in too much of note lately, but he was good. I mean, I don't believe the whole Jessica Alba attraction thing, not just like from, I don't mean it like in a like a physical perspective. I mean, like, why would she just immediately be throwing herself at this guy that she, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really know?
Doesn't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I had a hard time with that. It just seemed way too convenient for that to work.
She's perfectly okay with him grabbing her ass violently. She's okay with him acting weird and having blood all over him. Probably hasn't showered yet.
Their love scene was also a little bit like, if I was her, I'd be like, okay, there's red flags everywhere. There's just red flags all over the place. Why are you humoring this guy? Get away from him, because he's
not a good message to teenage girls of the time.
Yeah, a lot of pop culture jokes thrown in there. There was I think there was an O.J. Simpson joke in there. There was a Baywatch joke. ER. They talked about listening to Anya and Jewel. So lots of great pop culture references, mostly coming from Seth Green's character and what's his name? He plays he's on Daredevil. He's on that show Daredevil.
What, Seth Green's friend?
Yeah, Eldon Henson.
Yeah.
They call him Nub.
No,
right?
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, he's in Daredevil. He plays, what's his name? Froggy in that or something. Yeah, the sort of banter with the friends is pretty fun. I thought that the makeup work was pretty good too, like with Seth Green in the beer bottle in his skull and the decapitation of Nub.
I do love that, just the characters, in the sense that they're violent deaths and is just reacted by them with vague inconvenience, if nothing else. Like, it's just somewhat of an impediment.
It's also funny that it's not necessarily explained where this demon came from. It just sort of popped up and went into his hand, and it's discovered that the demon was, we didn't even see the demon go into his hand. Like, the demon was already in his hand for a little while by the time the movie starts. He just wasn't aware of it. And I think that it's kind of funny that they don't bother explaining this demon, where it came from, what's going on with it, anything like that. You just have Vivica A. Fox, who is, I guess, a demon hunter. What's her story? We don't even know what's going on with her. And then I love the scene when she uses this dagger to kill the demon, and then she just leaves. She's just like, all right, see you later. And then
my job is
she
done.
doesn't even take the dagger with her. Like, what if the demon comes back? Then you don't have the dagger anymore.
Don't smoke weed, kids, or you won't know when a demon gets in your hand.
Yeah. I think that's the moral of this story. I thought that Sawa did a good job making it look like his hand was possessed. I do.
It was good physical comedy.
Yeah, I also appreciate how quickly he decided and then took action to cut his own hand off. Like, I'm not sure I'd be able to do that so easily. But a lot of the jokes just seemed very juvenile and they didn't really land for me.
No, I mean the what I took away from it was just the interaction of the friends and him, especially when they came back, when they were dead or undead, whatever you want to call them. I don't know what the point was with them having them undead. It's kind of like Werewolf in London sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like if whoever you kill like haunts you or whatever. But that whole aspect was probably my favorite part. And just like when he decided he had to keep his hand busy, like just that scene where he's knitting to Rob Zombie.
I liked the knitting.
Yeah, I liked the
that was pretty funny.
The knitting to Rob Zombie was pretty good.
I do want to touch very briefly on the extreme misfortune of this movie's release date, and that it was a horror-adjacent teen film that came out literally 10 days after Columbine.
Yeah.
Which, if you look back, was the subject of some discussion at the time of its release. Not in its favor, even though it's such a patently absurd movie, but it gets stuck in an extremely unfortunate window where it's too late to move the release date of your movie. You can't move it back if it's already coming out in 10 days, and so this is not the kind of movie that was ever going to make a ton of money, but it had the misfortune of coming out at a time when the culture was generally not here for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any way that this coming out when it didn't hurt it. Like there's no way. When Columbine happened, I don't know if you remember this, Adam, but like everybody was on edge about violence in media. Like that was like one of the big things that a lot of people blamed was violence in media. So I'll definitely, like, horror movies and video games and things were under attack during this time, and I find it hard to believe that Idle Hands didn't suffer at least a little bit because of that event.
It is a violent movie about high school students.
Right, yeah. That features people getting decapitated and violently murdered. And I mean, it definitely is a pretty gory movie. It's definitely rated R. There's a lot of people that get murdered. It did end up with a 16% on Rotten Tomatoes, so not very well liked by critics. I do remember really liking it as a kid, though. I don't think it held up quite as much rewatching it today, but it's still kind of goofy and fun.
Yeah, I would say the humor doesn't quite hold up, like, with the the comedic timing and the jokes, but it was just more just like the way like people were being killed and things like that, and the more physical humor was the best part of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, you had like the iconic throwing the cat out the window scene. We all love that scene when he swings the cat and tosses it out the window. So great. Classic Idle Hands.
And then we finish up our full loop around soundtracks to this one, where the Offspring
are playing. They're playing a cover too. They're playing a cover of the Ramones, and then
we're in full circle mode here now.
Yeah. And then as they're playing, the demon hand ends up killing the
Offspring,
the front man.
Kills the front man.
Scalps him.
It is very perfect that we save this movie for the last in our discussion, because it also closes up the continued relationship between 90s movies and their phenomenal soundtracks.
Yeah.
And we didn't really hear much of Offspring after those years either. I don't remember, Offspring being a very popular band in the 2000s.
No, I mean, I think Pretty Fly for a White Guy was definitely their breakout. Like, that was huge. They had a lot of big singles before that, but I think Pretty Fly for a White Guy was definitely one that just played nonstop on the radio. And they've had a few hits since then, but nothing really on that same level. I still listen to The Offspring. I think they're a really good band. I think their stuff holds up. And they've come out with a couple albums since then that have been decent.
Yeah, but it just wasn't the same after the poor lead man got scalped. It really put a damper on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. That was definitely the end of that. Any final thoughts, guys, on Idle Hands or anything to wrap up this holiday season?
I not particular in Idle Hands. I mean, I think you did a great job of picking the movies, seeing as how they all just have like these overall themes and they're all very related to each other.
Yeah, they all fit together pretty nicely.
Funny.
Any final thoughts, Ken?
No, I did enjoy this, I think, more than you did on this rewatch. I was just miraculously entertained by just how much it is in its own world, doing its own thing, having people just chop off their hands and microwave them. Yeah, he microwaves his removed hand. Yeah, that was a bit unsettling.
How there was like fluid like coming out through the fingertips as it was cooking. It was like the fluid was like squirting out.
Oh,
and then his dead friends just came back and microwaved food in it.
Yeah, that was a good scene.
Because
that was definitely a good.
That's
scene.
just what you do.
All right, I believe that's going to do it for this month. I want to thank Adam Daggett for joining us. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 90spod for daily 90s goodness. And you can send us your questions and comments to 90s@filmpulse.net. If you have a moment, please consider reviewing us on iTunes and help this little community grow. I hope everyone has a fun and safe Halloween. And until next month, for Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson. This has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.